Says the,
All right. Hey, everybody. Frank is here to talk about Divine Wind. He's going to go through some slides. If we get the slides to work, we're having some stability problems. And then he's also going to talk about what events he's going to have around Divine Wind at the convention. So this will be our last of, 7 or 8 Zoom meetings. Those have gone really well. And Frank, you have the floor.
okay, thank you, Harold. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Frank Davis. I'm going to be talking today about my new game, which is called Divine Wind. It's a game about Pacific naval operations during World War II. Before I talk about the game, I just want to say thank you to Harold and Rob for bringing SDHist to the East Coast and to the Naval War College. There's no place I would rather debut this game. The Naval War College made a big impression on me. I remember reading about in the 1930s, they were doing some games that they called situation games. They also had fleet exercise games, but they did a situation game to try and determine how hard it would be to reach the Philippines in the face of the Japanese fleet. And they played it several times, and they realized, like in all, they weren't going to be able to get to the Philippines, and the guys on the Philippines were going to be screwed and all. And it was probably a good thing that they played that game. This is an example where a game is really instructive as opposed to just being enjoyable. Nimitz said after Pearl Harbor, he said, "It's a good thing the Japanese bombed our ships in Pearl Harbor, because if they didn't, we would be going straight to the Philippines and they'd sink all our battleships in deep sea." So this game was designed at my studio, which is called At Naval Intelligence, and it's going to be produced by Compass Games in 2024. Okay, so who is Frank Davis? The answer is no one under the age of 50 has any idea. I call myself the least prolific game designer in history. I've been designing games since I was a boy. I bought Tactics 2 and I thought there was stuff wrong with it, so I tried to redesign it. Throughout my teenage years, my friend and I worked on our own game designs. In 1971, I went to another store and I found S&T on the magazine rack. It was the issue with Flight of the Goban. This was early days for SPI. I usually say there was just SP without the I in those days. Anyhow, I wrote to SPI and I said I was moving to New York where my girlfriend was going to art school, and I was wondering if they needed any help. And they did invite me in, and I interviewed like and all, and they hired me. And I was the 6th employee in the company. There was Jim Dunnigan and Redmond Simonson, Al Nofi, David Isby, Fred Schachter, and I was number 6. And as number 6, I had the responsibility of running the shipping department. Anyhow, after about a year, they promoted me to be the head of customer service, which they really needed someone in customer service. And after I was working in customer service, answering game questions, at one day, Jim Dunnigan came to me in 1974, and he said, "I'm thinking of running an editor's choice game. Is there a game you would like to submit, and we'll take a poll on it, and if it passes, you'll get to design the game for the magazine?" So I said, "Yeah, I'll do that." And all. So I wrote a proposal. I've heard other people say the same story, but I wrote a proposal for a game called Frederick the Great. And Frederick the Great was a mid-18th century game, and there was not going to be any zones of control or any continuous fronts. It was going to be quite a different game than most of the people who played SPI games were familiar with. So Jim Dunnigan came back to me a few weeks later and he said, "Well, your game didn't really get many votes, but I'm going to do an editor's call, and I'm going to say we're going to publish Frederick the Great in issue 47. So I became a game designer. And I published Frederick the Great, and I don't think I wowed the entire gaming community, although people still talk about that game today. My trademark as a game designer is to be innovative, to go off the beaten path. Anyhow, after Frederick the Great, and I should also say that I was writing articles for S&T and developing games like Wolfpack with Jim Dunnigan. Anyhow, in '75, Dunnigan said, why don't you try doing a standalone game? So I said, okay, and I decided to do Waterloo. But I was going to do Waterloo. Jim had just designed Napoleon at Waterloo, and it didn't seem very Napoleonic to me. It seemed like a very simple game, that played a lot like, I don't know, a World War II game like D-Day or Battle of the Bulge or something. So I decided I would do something that was much more Napoleonic, and I did Wellington's Victory. It was, I think, the first monster game. I know it was before Terrible Swift Sword, but it might have been after we're in Europe. I'm not sure. But it was either the first or second monster game from SPI. The only other monster game at that time was La Bataille de Moskva by GDW. Anyhow, in Wellington's Victory, I again tried my hand at innovation, and I introduced a lot of things that no one had ever tried before. I introduced formations, facing, line of sight, morale, all these things. And I know I always sound like Vice President Gore, who says he invented the internet, but I really did introduce those things like morale in a grand tactical game. And Richburg immediately saw that, and he took it to the max. So anyhow, in 1977, I was contacted by a headhunter in Baltimore, and he offered me a job at Avalon Hill. And the job paid about $10,000 more than I was earning at SPI. So I moved to Baltimore, and I became an Avalon Hill game designer. At Avalon Hill, I developed two games, War and Peace and The Guns of August. And I began designing my own Avalon Hill game, which was called Rising Sun. Some people might remember it. It was like a rumor. Anyhow, I worked on that game for over a year, and it was a real bitch. It was the first time I was trying to design a game that was air, land, and sea combined. And I understood sort of how to make it work, but I didn't understand how could this possibly be playable in a reasonable amount of time. And at that point, I couldn't do it. There was no way I could figure it out. So I was stuck. And out of the blue, the headhunter called me again. And he said, hey, Frank, you interested in working for Parker Brothers? And I said, how much are they interested in me? And he said, well, they'll pay you $20,000 more than you're earning at Avalon Hill. So I beached Rising Sun, and I moved to Massachusetts, and I worked for Parker Brothers, where I wasn't working in war games. I was working in silly games, Anyhow, let's go to the next slide. Wait a minute. Okay, so I moved from Avalon Hill to Parker Brothers, and for all extensive purposes, my war game design career ended and all. So now I'm going to talk about the process of how I came back into wargaming. The first question I want to discuss is, what is a war game? And I want to say, for me, a war game is a contradiction in terms. Real wars have none of these popular game characteristics. They're not fun. You don't have an omniscient viewpoint. There's no solitaire system. There's no combat results table. There's no sequence of play. There's no clear rules. And there's not necessarily game balance. So real war have none of those characteristics, but war gamers want as many of those characteristics as they can get. And that presents a real problem for a serious game designer. The serious game designer says, this is what really happened, and this is what you want in the game. Let me think about that. So I didn't think about gaming again till 2022, which was 40 years after I stopped working on Rising Sun. Anyhow, I woke up one day in 2022 and I said, Frank, you're not getting any younger. I think you should finish that game from 1982. So I decided to change the name of the game to Divine Wind, and I began doing research. And I researched every game that was available now, and there were a lot of them. When I was working on Rising Sun, there were none. Now there were a lot of games. And they were all good games, but none of them spoke to me. None of them said, this feels like carrier operations in the Pacific. What I mean is, I saw stacks of ships in hexes, but I didn't get any sense of what a torpedo bomber was doing, or whether you would have more carriers or fewer carriers in any one task force. And all the games are, again, as I said about Napoleon at Waterloo, the games are mildly related to the Pacific War history, and they're very enjoyable games. But for me, they don't tell the story that I believe, the story that I'm enchanted by. So I also accumulated every book in English on the Pacific War, not on the tactics and not on the battles, on the whole war. And you'll notice in this middle row, I don't know if you can see my cursor, you'll notice, like, there's several books there about code breaking. And I read those books and I became very interested in code breaking. And I said, well, why don't any of the games show anything about the code breaking? So let's go.
We can see your cursor when you use it, just FYI, Frank.
You can see it?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I was studying, the material and figuring out how to create a Pacific game that would tell the story I wanted to hear. And eventually I found two games that were really influential. Pacific War by Mark Herman and Victory in the Pacific. I think that's a John Hill game, but I'm not sure. Anyhow, the game that I really admired was Pacific War. Mark Herman was amazing. He devoted so much time and so much research, and that game has everything you could possibly want about the Pacific War and more, including a playtime of the campaign game of well over 100 hours. On the other hand, on Victory in the Pacific, the game, first of all, let me go back to Pacific War. Pacific War, the map, there's two maps, and there are many, many hexes in the maps. There are many potential places to fight over and to worry about. I felt that this slows down the game. I felt that there was something wrong about having that many locations. Even though those locations are real, I said, how are they all going to affect the game? On the other side of the scale is Victory in the Pacific. They reduced the number of areas. It became an area game. And they reduced the number of areas, but it didn't have the right feeling again. It had a real strong emphasis on battle, on surface warfare, like World War I, like in all. And the more I read, the more I realized, well, this is not really an accurate view of how the Pacific War actually went. So in the middle is my game Divine Wind, which I tried to put right between Pacific War and Victory in the Pacific. Divine Wind is a moderately complex game, maybe even a higher complex game. I would rate it 7. But I designed it so that the campaign game should be able to be played in 4 hours once you understand the rules. And I want to look, let's just see if okay, I can do this. Can you see that? I'm blowing up the map.
Yeah, we can see you're zoned in on this map.
Okay, so this is the Divine Wind map, and I told you I always try and be innovative in order to tell the story that I think is the right story. So Divine Wind is completely different than either area games, point-to-point games, or hex games. Area games, Divine Wind, I invented a new thing I call a bi-level map. The bi-level map is made of these circles, and the circles are called operation zones. and then I color group them into 3 circles, and I call them campaign zones. And this is one of the most important concepts in the game. Planning on the level of a campaign zone and operating, conducting combat, searching, and stuff like that is on the level of an operation zone. Very important concept in this game, never been done before. And once again, it's the color coding that tells you the 3 operation zones that belong to that campaign zone. And we'll talk about how campaign zones and operation zones affect gameplay in a few minutes. So this next slide. Okay, so what's different about Divine Wind? Basically, I decided to concentrate on 3 things that I felt would help me tell a better story. The first one was the map board. As I said, hexes, there's a lot of deep ocean hexes that no one ever fought in. They had absolutely no effect on the war. They did have an effect on movement and on range, but I wondered, like in all like that, you know, if those were unimportant strategically in the war, why should I have to count my movement allowance through various hexes? And even worse, my range allowances for all my planes and all like that. So I got rid of both the hexes and the areas, and I settled on these bi-level zones, mainly to make the game simpler and to speed up play. There are no movement allowances, there are no range allowances, there are no terrain effects. Basically, each game turn represents 4 months, and a fleet can move anywhere in 4 months. And there, you don't have to count. But basically, you just move from one campaign zone to another. And then in that campaign zone, you may move among those 3 operation zones. And you'll see more about that as I proceed. The second thing I concentrated on is fog of war. I introduced several new kinds of game mechanics, naval staff planning, code breaking, and simultaneous hidden movement, which has never been done well in the entire history of war games. And I may or may not have solved that problem. Okay, with staff planning, the Pacific War, what the naval staffs planned every significant campaign and operation months in advance. You pre-committed to a course of action without necessarily knowing what your opponent was going to do. These plans could run up to 1,000 pages. And like I said, from a player's standpoint, you're making a commitment to say, this is your next area objective and all. This is where you're going to concentrate your forces and all. Now, countering that, the game introduces code breaking. Code breaking means you can find out about the enemy plans without him knowing about it and all. And finally, simultaneous hidden movement. In the old days, a lot of naval games tried to do written hidden movement or calling out grid coordinates. None of them, like I said, none of them seemed to really work. And but I always kept in the back of my mind that how the hell were the Japanese planning to do a surprise attack on Midway if if every piece was on the board and you could see where they move all the time? So I decided there must be some way to do simultaneous hidden movement that's simple and fast. So that was the goal. The third thing that I concentrated on is also a complete going off the beaten track. The more I read about the battles, the surface battles in the Pacific, the more I realized they were nothing like the Battle of Jutland. They were nothing like a line of ships lining up and turning broadside and targeting the enemy and cherry picking which target they wanted to fire on and firing on it. In the Pacific War, most of the surface engagements happened at night. The ships really didn't see the targets. They did see muzzle flashes, and they did have, especially the Americans in the early days, they did have radar, which would give them signatures of different size ships. The problem with muzzle flashes is you don't know whether it's a friend or an enemy. And the problem with radar signatures is a Japanese battleship and American battleship look very similar on your radar and all. So what I mean by chaos is I decided that combat would be non-simultaneous, meaning you don't get a chance necessarily to fire back when you're fired on and all. You may get a chance, but you may not, like and all. And also the idea of cherry picking, of concentrating all your fire on a particular ship. I put some limits on that kind of thing. I thought that that was too much player control to the point of lack of realism. And overarching that, the game is based on this question. The real question is, how did the U.S. Navy position itself in exactly the right place at exactly the right time in the vast Pacific theater of operations? Divine Wind focuses on the operational level mechanics that decided the war. And next to that, I have a sample decoded Japanese message. You can see the names of their carriers in there, the Soryu and the Hiryu and all. I could talk at length about the actual Japanese code, JN25. It's another one of my favorite subjects. However, it's extremely complicated to understand both the code and the code breaking and all. It was extremely important in the war, and I wanted to have some play mechanics that would give players the feeling that they were attempting to break the enemy code. Incidentally, I'm going to pause every 10 slides or so. I have a screen that says questions. So you can feel free to interrupt me, but if you wait until those question slides come up, it will probably do better. Okay, so here's Divine Wind. And on this thing, I've highlighted certain bullets that are another way of showing you what is different about Divine Wind. The first one is the bi-level campaign and operations zone map. The second one is what I told you, simple simultaneous hidden movement. The third one is naval planning and code breaking. I'm just going to read the white ones too. The GUI style player aids. I was involved in the software industry when Windows came in and the GUI interface became paramount. And I think that war games are starting to move in that direction, but I feel the game is the graphics. I feel that's what we tend to get attracted to. And the graphics in war games still have room for improvement. And I tried to do some player aids here that I thought would help move us in that direction. The next thing that's in white is card-driven solitaire mechanics. I have said before, this game uses hidden simultaneous movement, totally secret double-blind movement. But Compass Games wanted a solitaire version. So I created a solitaire version that's card-driven, and instead of secrecy, you introduce unpredictability. So you still don't know, except when you draw the card, where the enemy player is going. One of the things, well, we'll talk more about the solitaire in a minute. Anyhow, the other things are operational fleet command system. This is actually using historical commanders for their specialty, like surface operations, amphibious operations, carrier operations. You'll see that I do have the leaders in this game, which again is something that's not really done too often in naval and strategic naval war games. But because these commanders had specialties, I thought it was a good way to limit player options. I'm not a sandbox designer. I'm a history designer. The next thing is air and ground supremacy. The Pacific War was really not a naval war. It was really an air war. And having air supremacy in a campaign zone is really the goal of the game, like in all. You use carriers and you use land air bases that you build, like in all, because altogether you're always trying to increase your air superiority in the campaign zone. And the last thing is non-simultaneous combat, which I talked about a minute ago. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this slide this is just a picture of some of the pieces. And I just wanted to introduce this before we go into any deeper detail. So there's 3 or 4 kinds of pieces here. On the top are fleets and task forces. They're really interchangeable terms. It's just that the Americans called subgroups, task forces, and the Japanese called their subgroups main force, advanced force, stuff like that. But the fleets and the task forces are what you use to organize your ships and to assign operations to. Okay, in the middle, on the left and the right outside edges are the commanders, and they include three kinds of commanders. Yamamoto is a campaign level commander. He exerts the ability to influence a battle or a operation anywhere in the campaign zone where he is. The other leaders are operation zone leaders. They are either specialists in surface operations or carrier operations. They limit what you can do based on their assigned number there, like 1 or 2. Basically, it means like if you have a 2-leader in a fleet that has carriers, he can basically conduct 2 carrier operations in that turn and all. And similarly, if you have a surface commander in there, he could command up to 2 surface operations in the turn and all. In the middle, I have air units that are called squadrons. These are breakdown units. The main units in the game are air groups. There are carrier air groups, and there are land-based air groups, and there are reconnaissance air groups. But in battle, if you're using like the advanced rules, you can break down an air group. And incidentally, the air groups are named for the carriers. So for instance, the Lexington has its own air group and all like that. But you can break it down into these more anonymous squadrons, which represent the torpedo bombers, the dive bombers, the fighters, and the level bombers. And that's something that I said I felt was missing in games, having more of a sense of different types of planes attacking and having them actually affect how effective the attack was. On the bottom, you see the turn record track. It's color-coded. The first 6 turns are the rising sun scenario. The second 6 turns are called the divine wind scenario. Entire campaign game is 12 turns. I said before, each turn represents 4 months. So there are 3 turns in a year. In a 2-player game, you can play the campaign game and either of these shorter scenarios. These scenarios take about 2 hours each. The campaign game takes 4 hours. In solitaire play, which I'll have to explain like in all, but in solitaire play, one side is going to be on the offense and the player is going to be on the defense. The non-player is represented by the AI. I'm sorry, not the non-player. The offensive is handled by the AI and the player handles the defense. And that's what I said, when you pick cards, they're going to represent the decisions you would make during the staff phase when you were planning on what objectives and what forces to assign to those objectives. The cards will do that for the non-player. Okay, so I'm going to take a pause. Anyone have any questions?
Frank, it's Harold. I've got a couple of questions, and it might just be you and me face to face. So I see that we're on slide 10 of 66, so I don't want to take up. I'm
not going to go through all of them.
Okay, good news. But you said, let's see, simultaneous movement, hidden movement, but not simultaneous combat. So tell me how that plays out in an interesting way.
I guess that may be covered better in other slides, but
yeah, if you're going to get to it, that's fine too. I have another question.
Okay, what's your other question?
So the other question is the leaders. Why do you think that we haven't seen more leaders in strategic Pacific games?
Well, I feel that players want to have a lot of control. I feel that as a designer, I like to put a lot of constraints on players. I think you get a more realistic game, and I think it's more fun to play a realistic game. But players say they don't care what happened in history. They want control. They want to do whatever they want. if they want to attack Australia, even though they have no amphibious landing craft or something like that, they want to be able to do it and all. But I put the leaders in because I felt that the leaders were a way to augment the need for planning. In other words, if you're conducting an amphibious landing, you need to have a certain leader with that fleet. It's a constraint and all like that. And that leader is going to use up his ability to run operations, which is another constraint on the player. It's like having it's like having a tactical leader who influences, or even a higher level, like a brigade or a division leader, who influences units within his range. These influence units only in the same operation zone, but they are specialized. They're not just, okay, you can move because you're close, you're in my operation zone, and all like that. They're more specialized, and again, I think it presents more problems for players, and I'm not sure whether players like that or not. But let's continue through a couple more slides at least, because I want to make some things clear. Okay, Harold? Harold?
Yeah, all yours, Frank. I'm with you.
Okay, so I'll go through these a little quicker and all like that. The first thing to realize is that all the landmass on Earth fits in the Pacific Ocean. It's a vast area, like and all like that, and it's hard to find the enemy in this area. There were only 5 carrier battles between 1941 and 1945, about one a year. Partially that was because they were afraid of each other, but partially it was because, like, finding the enemy was like a difficult thing, which is why I have fewer areas in this game, fewer operation zones, because otherwise you'd spend all your time searching for people you couldn't find. Okay, again, on the maps, like and all, to make the game move faster, I got rid of mainland Asia because it doesn't have to do with naval operations. I got rid of the mid-Pacific Ocean hexes because no one ever fought in them. I got rid of the idea of having multiple locations to search in. Basically, you're searching in one operation zone. I got rid of the idea of movement and range hex counting. I really don't like when you have to count the range and see if you're within range of the fleet that's moving across the map. You have to always count, are you 7 hexes or not? That's a game mechanic, and it's somewhat tied to reality, but it doesn't feel like the war. I have no terrain effects because every operation zone has some land and some water. The land is considered good for Marines and for Army, but not for ships. Okay. I also wanted to focus the game planning on operation planning and campaign planning rather than movement hex to hex, or thinking of individual objectives. I wanted the people to think of a large sea area like the Southwest Pacific or the South Pacific, and then an operation zone in there like the Solomons or New Caledonia, that area, or Samoa, and all like that. So you're thinking on the large level, the campaign area, and then you're focusing down. As I said, when you move into a campaign area, you can only move within that campaign area for the rest of the turn. I know this is not clear yet, but eventually, I might be able to make some of this clear. Okay, well, the next thing is I really loved Jeremy White's presentation the other day, because I already had this football diagram in mind. And the difference between, I'm not sure what exactly Jeremy was doing, but what I'm saying here is, imagine knowing what football player is coming next. When you play a game that doesn't have hidden movement and doesn't have, even if it has dummies, you have a lot more information than you should have. And it makes the game feel very different. It's another thing that I think players want the game to feel more simplistic, and to play fast. And like I said, I wouldn't attempt simultaneous movement unless I could make it easy. I don't know. The last thing I want to say is secrecy versus solitaire. This game has a lot of secrecy because I need to make a solitaire game out of it. I've changed secrecy to unpredictability through the use of cards. Okay, the next thing is something we've discussed before. Basically, this is a diagram of the Battle of Savo Island, with the background being one of the player aid cards. This is called the surface engagement card. And basically, what this is showing you is that you can't really pick your targets. You pick ships that fire on you, and you pick ships based on basically you pick ships that fire on you. Sometimes you have the initiative and you can fire first, and then they're going to fire back on you. When you do fire, it's not simultaneous. You can basically fire ships. I think you can fire 3 ships before the enemy can fire, and then it rotates between the players, like in all. All the ships have different ranges and different armament, and they use different columns on the CRT. But the important idea here is you can't necessarily pick a particular target. You can pick a range, and you can pick a ship that fired, or you can pick the closest ship to you, like in all. Anyhow, you can't cherry pick, and you can't totally control who you're firing at. Okay, the next thing is when we begin to go into fog of war. This is going to get complicated, and since we're down to just 2 of us, I'll try and cut it a little short if I can. Okay, I said before that this uses a non-written simultaneous movement system that involves planning. This device, which is a Rummikub tray, this is something I use to illustrate how naval plans look. The naval plans consist of, I'll go to the next slide, it makes it a little clearer. Hold on. Okay, then let's blow this one up. Okay, this is a player aid called the staff planner. The staff planner allows you to decide, you give the plan a code name like AI or AF and all. You pick the campaign zone, which is the objective of the plan, and you pick fleets that you're assigning to the plan. You can have 1 fleet assigned to a plan, or you can have multiple fleets that are nested, subordinate to the fleet on this thing. And those are the forces that are going to conduct that plan, okay? So, and once you do that, you're committed to that. You're going to go to the Southwest Pacific if this marker on the other side says Southwest Pacific and all. The Allied player has the same kind of thing, and then this on the bottom shows you the types of markers that go in these rows. The first row, the top row where it says plan, you would have a code name marker face down. So that would say Watchtower. The campaign zone has an abbreviation like AP, means Asian Pacific. And the fleet or task force has a number like and all like that. And you're going to have all the ships in that task force executing that plan against that objective. There's no writing. Once you do this, you're committed to it, so both players can move at the same time. There's a limited amount of reaction. It's expensive to change a plan to react, so it's not really used too often. Okay, continuing here, this is just more information about code breaking and fog of war. The name of the plan that would be on the staff planner is AI. The campaign zone is hidden, and the fleet is face down. So you know that there's a plan called AI, but you don't know what it is. And it's not necessarily the attack on Pearl Harbor, which is what it was historically. The Japanese named that plan AI. But AI could mean like, the attack on New Guinea or the attack on Midway or something like that. In terms of code breaking, this is a good way to explain it. The game uses Scrabble-like alphabetical code letters to secretly decrypt enemy operations plans. Like in Scrabble, you keep your letters hidden. And I'm gonna open the Camino. What's the word I want? Camino. I don't remember exactly what the word is. Anyhow, this is the back of this. So there are these code break markers that are put in a cup, like when you draw markers for initiative. On the back of the marker is a decryption letter. You match the decryption letter to the enemy code name. When you have two letters, you can decode a Japanese plan, which allows you to view the zone and the fleet that's associated with that plan. I'll talk in a minute about how that's actually done. Anyhow, this is what the plan looks like on the other side. So if I have an A and an I on my Scrabble tray and all like that, I can read that plan. The other player won't know that I read that plan. That's the mechanics I said I should explain later and all. So the other player doesn't know which letters you have decoded, and he doesn't know which plans you have decoded. And each turn he can form new plans, but your code continues to accumulate. Your knowledge of the enemy code continues to accumulate and all. So now he's making plans that you might already be able to break. Okay. This is just a little bit about the solitaire game. You don't have the staff planner, and you don't have several of the elements of the two-player game. This is a thing I call the solitaire controller. This has the game turns. One side is Allied, one side is Japanese. You only play with one, you're either going to play that the Japanese are the AI or the Allies are the AI. These are examples of Japanese cards. There are Japanese cards you draw for the campaign zone. Basically, you're going to pick at random a campaign zone. It's kind of historically constrained, though. So, for instance, in 1942, you would not probably pick Okinawa and all like that. The odds would be very small that you would have that as an objective. This is the fleets that are assigned to whatever campaigns you draw. And I should mention that a lot of the times, these are two different zones. They can be one zone or two different zones, making it harder for the defender to defend against. These talk about operational choices that the AI makes. The AI can move, and the card will direct them where it can move within that campaign zone, or it can conduct airstrikes, or it can attempt a surface engagement or an amphibious operation, those kind of things. The card selected by the AI determines which of those things the non-player is going to do. And then down at the very bottom level are tactical decisions, like in all that the AI makes in support of these operations. Okay, just a few more slides and then we can stop if you want. Okay, so just a quick review of the way the map was designed. This was an early prototype of the map. Notice the three circles and then the larger circle. That became the campaign zone, and the three circles became the operation zones. This started from some naval map that I found, like and all like that. That was, it just struck me right away. Hey, this is a good approach for designing the map and all. So now I'll show it to you in reality. This is what it looks like in the game. Okay, so notice that this operation zone is a different color than this. These three zones that are the same color, they're called one campaign zone. And the name of that campaign zone is the Southwest Pacific. This one is in a different campaign zone. There are three that go up toward Japan, up the Asian coast. Those are called the Asian Pacific. Down here, we have another color. These colors are more distinct on the actual game board. This is part of what I call the Commonwealth. which involves Australia, New Guinea, and the Indian Ocean and all. Again, when you're making a plan, you're saying, my objective is the Southwest Pacific, or my objective is the South Pacific. There are only 8 campaign zones. There are 24 operation zones, but there are only 8. You're only dealing with picking one of 8 as your objective. Now, you can pick more than one, but the problem then is logistics. It's very expensive to mount campaigns in 2 different areas with different fleets and all like that. Basically, the game is designed to reflect the historical pace and the amount of activity. And that means, like in all, that you're likely to be restrained to one or two plans per turn and all. So think now you're deciding, okay, you're going to operate in the Southwest Pacific and you're going to move the 7th Fleet there and all like that. So you're only dealing with moving one marker you're only moving one marker and you don't have to count anything. You're just moving it. Let's say it's in Pearl Harbor. It's going to the south. Or let's say it's in New Caledonia. It's going to the Southwest Pacific. You put it face down in the Southwest Pacific, in any of the 3 circles in the Southwest Pacific. And you're not detected at that point. I think I'm starting to make your head swim, but I promise I'll stop in a second.
Frank, you're doing good. You can do as many slides as you care to do. We'll be here and record it, and people can watch whatever they choose.
Okay, I mentioned before, like about GUI interface things. So I call my things not player aid cards. I call them planners and controllers. You've already seen the planner, like the staff planner. A controller is like this. The surface engagement one that I showed you. Well, wait, let's do this one first. This is the Fleet Task Force Organizer. So these are the names of the fleets in here. There are only 7 fleets and all like that. And these are the components that are assigned to that fleet, which includes naval air groups, escort groups, transport groups, ground forces, and capital ships. The capital ships are individually named ships for carriers, battleships, and heavy cruisers and all. The other naval units are in groups like escort carrier group, transport group, cruiser destroyer escort group. Those are not individually named. This thing is called the Task Force Fleet Organizer. This is where all the components that are in the fleet live. They're not on the map. You don't physically move them. And these are the ports that the Japanese control. And you can have the fleet be in the port and all like that. Down here is an example of a controller. And this gets into the non-simultaneous or non-cherry picking. So this is called the RAID controller. And these are the targets for the RAID. And the targets include airfields, shipyards, anchorage, opportunity, which means you get to pick any of those, and cap, which means you've been deflected and you have to engage the enemy cap. Okay, the important thing is you don't say, I'm going to attack the airfield. You roll a 10-sided die, and if it comes up after it's modified, if it comes up with a 4 or 5, then the airfield becomes your target and all. Same with shipyards, same with anchorage. Like, as I said, opportunity allows you to pick anything, so that makes it a little less restrictive. Okay, we can skip that one. Oh, this one was the surface engagement controller. There's a night engagement side and a day engagement side. There are certain effects right on the player aid card, die roll modifiers. These are the ranges. The ranges are handled like I just said about the RAID control. You either have from the scenario an opening start range, or you roll the die, and after modifying it, you'll get one of these ranges and all. When you roll a 0 here, you're at surprise engagement, which means you're right next to the enemy. That's what happened at Savo Island. The Japanese opened fire when they were that close and all. Okay, so here's second Wait a minute. I want to show just a little bit more. Okay, so we're gonna start diving down to a more detailed level. So this we can skip. This just means we're going to go into more depth. Okay, so this is an example. This is a Naval War College game, which is fought with two maps. It's double blind. The maps are, it's team level, and it's you have a referee and all like that. In my game, I use the same concepts, but these are smaller player aid cards of the main map. And this allows you to do the secret movement among those 8 zones that I talked about. So you're going to take the assigned fleet and move it to the Southwest Pacific, which is over here and all. So remember, you've only got 7 fleets and 8 zones and all, and it's pre-planned. So there's not a lot of work moving things and all. And the enemy doesn't know. This is hidden. You begin to air search after you move. Air units in that campaign zone can search. They can find you. They can attack you before you can do anything because they have a longer range. When they find you, you turn them face up. When they're face up, they can be attacked. I don't know. At the end of the turn, like a lot of naval games, you have to go back to port, like and all like that. You don't stay on this map. Each turn is 4 months. You don't stay on this map through the game. You come out, you go to your assigned campaign zone, you run operations there, and then you go back to port. Okay, and only the markers really are on the map. The actual ships will be put on the surface engagement if you're lucky enough to get close enough to have a surface engagement. Okay, I can skip a lot of these. Okay, this is really the main map, which is similar to what I just showed you about the campaign planners. The campaign planners are smaller versions of this, and they're kept secret. You have one and I have one. We're moving our fleets on those. The other guy doesn't see it. The other guy runs his air searches, detects them, and then they're put on this map, okay, the fleets and all like that. So once again, there's no hexes or areas, no zones of control. There's 8 campaign zones, which are the same colors. There are 24 operation zones, which are approximately 500 miles across. And basically, everything is going to occur, everything except long-range air search occurs within one of these circles. The long-range air search can search the whole campaign zone, and it does automatically every turn. In other words, both players search those 8 zones every turn to see if there are any detectable enemies there. More about the pieces, like and all like that. Here's the individual ships. That's hard for me to see this. Wait, I can blow it up. Okay, so here's the Colorado, the California. Here's the Warspite. These are the fleets, the individual carriers. I'm sorry, I'm not using this. They're the individual carriers. These are the carrier air groups named for the carriers. And all these are the units that can be broken down to torpedo bombers and dive bombers. Same thing for the Americans. They have task forces with individual ships. Here's the naval groups I mentioned. That's a carrier escort group or escort carrier group. This is a destroyer cruiser group. It's just called an escort group. All of them have these 3-letter acronyms: escort group, escort carrier group, transport group, submarine group. Here's the leaders. Those are the leaders. The big guy is Yamamoto. This is just a subset. Each side has, I think, 10 leaders. And think of the leaders that you assign the leaders like you assign the ships. You know what the operation you're trying to accomplish is. You want to bring one or more of the leaders who specializes in that kind of operation to that plan. Here's your ground forces. There are only two kinds. EGF means elite ground force, like the Marines, or the Japanese SNLF, is that right? Acronym. And here's the breakdown ones that I talked about before, the dive bombers, the torpedo bombers, and the fighters. Let's see if that's everything. Yeah, I think that's everything. Here's an example of the GUI interface controls, player aid controllers that we've made. So you already saw this. This is called the campaign operation planner. Each player has one. It's secret. Down here, this has to do with code breaking. Those question marks, which we may not have time to get into too much. These are the fleet organizers. This is the airstrike controller, which is worth taking a look at. I already showed you the raid controller. The airstrike controller also, like the surface engagement and the raid controller, has a die roll. The die roll is modified for certain reasons, and the die roll tells you what defense ring you can attack. You can't cherry pick whatever ship you want. You have to penetrate into a ring, and then you can pick a ship in that ring. And depending on how many ships are in that ring, you're modifying the die roll, like that against you. So this center line is the die roll line. These are the rings. This is the outer ring where you basically put escorts. The middle ring is basically for battle line ships, and the inner ring is basically for carriers and transports. There's a lot of special controls here that are mainly optional rules and all like that have to do, basically, I'll just go over this very little bit. Basically, an air group starts on the fleet. The carrier is in the fleet. The air group is on the carrier. When you want to launch the air group, you move it to the launch group. Then you roll the die. You are then able to attack one of these rings, and a ship in one of these rings. And then you go back to the recover group, and then back to the fleet group, and then you can come out again. These are land bombers that can participate against carriers, and each carrier air group attacks individually. So if you have 6 carriers like the Japanese had at Pearl Harbor, you basically have 6 units and 6 die rolls. The die rolls are a 2-step die roll. One determines the ring you attack or the ring you penetrate, and the other determines the effect of the combat. We did the raid controller before. It's very similar. It has, again, there are defensive values depending on how many land units and how many air units are in this zone that you're attacking with your raid. And there's also close air support, which is slightly different than the raid. Close air support has to do with ships in that operation zone are considered in the sea control area. Air controllers are planes on the airstrip in that area, and ground control are the ground units in that area. Once again, you don't have complete freedom over which you're attacking. We did this one. That's the night surface engagement. That's the same one, the day surface engagement. It happens the same. I mean, it's the same layout, but there are different modifiers and there are different opening ranges and all. That we don't need to talk about. Oh, except for this. This is the sequence of play. Begins with a staff phase, which is when you do the naval planning that I've discussed. Then there's the campaign phase, when you move your fleet marker into the campaign zone that you chose in your plan. Then you would be searched for in that campaign phase, and you would be attacked by land-based aircraft if you're detected. In the operations phase, everything is occurring now in one circle and all. You basically search for the enemy in the same circle. If you find them, you attack them on one of those controllers. After all the air operations are done, if the other side is willing to engage, you can have a naval engagement. It's very hard to have a naval engagement if you have carriers involved. They're always good. It was almost verboten to send surface ships in if the enemy had control of the air. It was like shooting ducks in a barrel or something like that. Then there's a logistical phase. Basically, you're dealing with resource points, and those resource points are expended when you create plans. And depending on the size of the forces you give to the plans, they cost you more resource points. The control phase determines how you get the resource points. Basically, the campaign zones you control are each worth a certain amount of points, and basically you just count up what you control. There are only eight zones here. Going back to this one. Oh wait, no, is that the right one? Yeah, this is the right one. Okay, these are the 8 campaign zones with the color codes, and these are the values of control and resource points that they provide. So Japan is 7, the Southwest Pacific is 6. If you control that campaign zone, which is basically having 1.5 times as much air power in the zone, then you get the resource points for that zone. Okay, we already did that one. We did something like that. This,
Frank, it might be a good time for me to just ask you a couple questions, and you can
okay.
talk about what you're going to do at the convention. Maybe that's where we start. What are your plans at the convention, and how can people see it and even play it?
Well, I signed up for two demo games. The hard part is giving the people enough information that they feel that they can play a game turn. I will cut out a lot of things like that would slow down play or that would be difficult for them to master. If you tell someone you got to create an operation plan before you can move there, and you can only create 1 or 2 plans at all, and then I tell them how to do the code breaking, they should be able to begin playing pretty fast. My goal is to have 2 3-turn scenarios played at the convention. In other words, one on Friday and one on Saturday. There's 3 turns, whereas the normal scenario is 6 turns. A 3-turn scenario, if you know what you're doing, should be playable in an hour. If you don't know what you're doing, it's going to take about half that amount of time to get you up to speed. So I did this at the Compass convention last November, and I was able to explain the game sufficiently for a couple of people to play and get some sense of how the game plays, like and all. And the goal of this presentation is just to show enough elements of the game that maybe you'll be interested to come by or to sign up for one of the demo games at the convention. The demonstration games are listed for 2 hours. If they take a little longer, I'm willing to stay. Hopefully they won't even take that long. My main goal is to demonstrate for people what this game offers that's different and whether or not that seems like something they'd be more interested in.
Good. And you'll probably be set. I know that there are 2 times that are on the tabletop event schedule, but
Yes.
You'll probably be available for other times if people wanted to.
Yeah, I'll be there Friday evening, Saturday all day, and a little bit of Sunday. I will set up the game probably both times, since I have to have it ready Friday night at 8. I will set up the games. I'll come in around 5 and I'll set them up. And then people can start asking me questions and I can start showing them various mechanics. I have experience doing that and the reaction was very good. The game sounds very complicated because I'm trying to rush through a lot of information. Conceptually, the game is not complicated. There are a few moving pieces, there are a few choices, and there's a lot of poker playing, basically, like and all. But people are really enthusiastic about the bi-level map, which greatly takes out just a lot of details and all. And then they're also really enthused about the code breaking system. even though it's simplified, it feels like breaking the enemy code. You can read the plans by drawing letters, and secretly you obtain enough of the code that you can read certain of his plans. And as I said, he can't see the letters, so he doesn't know how much of his code is broken, and he can't see which plans you're able to read. And that's hard to explain, but it's not that hard to do at all. So anyhow, I think I'll stop now. I really appreciate all the time you've given this game. I think that people are going to be very overwhelmed by the amount of information I've tried to present here. But on the other hand, I'm hoping the graphics and the new concepts in the game and the story this game presents are going to be of interest to a lot of naval enthusiasts.
It looks interesting, and some very interesting concepts that we haven't seen other places. Frank, one last question. What is your expectation of printing and publication, distribution?
My understanding from Compass is that they have a 6-month pipeline. The game is scheduled to go to them before the end of the year, probably in November. So assuming like that they shake it down further between November and the beginning of the year, and then they send it to China and all like that, they're telling me it takes up to 6 months to get the game produced. So I am assuming the middle of 2024.
Very good. All right, Frank. Well, thanks for taking the time, and look forward to seeing you at the convention.
Okay, thank you, Harold. Have a good day.